Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the BTS Theorist podcast. My name is Willie Eaglehawk, and of course, I am the BTS Theorist. On today's episode, I want to talk to you all about the BTS ARMY Love Yourself, Speak Yourself revolution. These two sayings, love yourself and speak yourself, they're pretty familiar to those throughout the fandom. Of course, the Love Yourself era, the trilogy of albums, was amazing. In my opinion, BTS's most influential and amazing era for sure. And of course, there was the Speak Yourself tour, and more importantly, when BTS went to speak at the United Nations General Assembly, RM's speech was all about love yourself and also speaking yourself. So these sayings are so important to the fandom and really something that I want to delve into a little deeper today, because I believe that through my research and the past 4 years of collecting ARMY stories and analyzing them and working with ARMY and just being in the fandom, I have come to understand that we are a part of a love yourself, speak yourself revolution, hand in hand with BTS. And it's happening right here, right now, and we're all a part of it. So, this word of revolution and revolutionary might be quite new to you, or perhaps the understanding that I want to bring is new to you. Back in 2019, when I first started researching BTS and really delving into the world of being an ARMY, I came across a video that came out, I believe, the day after the music video for Intro Persona was released. And it was like a vlog from a year before where RM is talking about his life. And he says that you can change the world in two ways. The first is to see everything positively, and the second is to be a revolutionary. And so I found this very interesting that he was quoting this person and using this word revolutionary. So I started to kind of analyze and examine everything that BTS and ARMY did with this lens of revolutionary. Are they changing the world? And if so, how? And also, what does it mean to be a modern day revolutionary? There's this traditional notion of a revolutionary being someone who wages war on someone else, a colonialist, an angry white man. A revolution is typically something bathed in blood, right? It's not something that we want to aim for as individuals. But what if there were more than one definition of being a revolutionary? Throughout my research and my writing, I've come to develop my own understanding of what it means to be a modern day revolutionary. And I believe that modern day revolutionaries stand for love, nonviolence, and justice for all. And this is what I've learned from looking at BTS's work and looking at the amazing capacity of the ARMY fandom. Through examining BTS's work, I have come to understand that BTS's journey as revolutionaries is heavily rooted in the mundane, and it has everything to do with their love yourself journey. It all comes down to how they treat themselves, how do they treat one another, how they treat their friends and family and community, and of course, how they treat ARMY. And this is what we've come to learn from them, how to love ourselves. And it's woven throughout their music, throughout all of their interviews and their content. And because of this, because of BTS talking about how they're learning to love themselves and how it's not a linear journey and how there's no end destination, it means that ARMY has developed this kind of self-love literacy. If you're to ask any ARMY in the fandom, like, what did you learn from BTS? Tell me about BTS. Tell me about yourself as an ARMY. 9 times out of 10, they're going to talk about the love yourself era. They're going to say something like, BTS taught me how to love myself, or I'm learning how to love myself through BTS. Just like how RM said that he's learning how to love himself thanks to the love of ARMY, and that he wants ARMY to use BTS to love themselves as well. Now, this whole notion of self-love might seem really airy-fairy to you, but actually I believe that it's the foundation of everything good in this world, and that in order to truly change this world for the better, to truly enact positive social change, we have to start from a place of self-love. And this is what I've learned from studying BTS and ARMY. I really delve deep into this and discuss it more in the first of the I Am ARMY book series called I Am ARMY, It's Time to Begin. And that's why I'm talking about it today, because just yesterday, the second edition of I Am ARMY, It's Time to Begin was released. It's been 3 years since its first release, and now it's got a new cover, it's been updated, and it's ready to meet a whole new generation of readers. And I'm so excited to be bringing it to the world all over again. And as part of kind of giving this book a facelift and going through it all again, I was reading all of the chapters. And there's a chapter at the very end of the book. It's the final chapter in the book, and it's by me. So I was kind of walking down memory lane with this one. And I do believe the chapter's called Exit the Magic Shop, Enter the Revolution. And within this chapter, I do delve deep into what I'm calling the Love Yourself, Speak Yourself revolution. Because I believe that what I learned from putting that book together is that ARMY are revolutionaries, and what they're doing against the odds, despite the odds, is learning how to love themselves and doing every ounce of good they can to themselves, to their community, and in the world. And that's so powerful, because if every single person were to right now make a dedication to love themselves and to go on the same love yourself, speak yourself journey that ARMY are on right now, the world would radically change for the better. And I think that's so amazing. Like, so we might think that self-love is so airy-fairy and, oh, that's so selfish just to think about loving yourself. But no, actually, I believe that many of our problems in the world, like let's forget about capitalism and patriarchy and colonialism for a second, is because we don't love ourselves and we haven't been taught what this looks like. And we haven't been taught that it's okay to not love yourself some days and that nothing has to look perfect. And of course, then capitalism benefits off of us not loving ourselves. Of course, who's making money out of this scenario? It's definitely not us. And I think if we all learnt to love ourselves just a little, we would be able to stand in more of a resistance of the status quo. And in today's world, to love ourselves as ARMY, as whoever we might be, is kind of giving the middle finger to the system, because it profits off of us hating ourselves through the division that arises from us not being in touch with ourselves and not loving ourselves, through all the violence that takes place in this world. So self-love is incredibly powerful, and I believe that is the basis of all revolutionaries, as we've seen through ARMY, through BTS, that so much positive work can come from self-love, so much positive change, even if it's just the smallest ounce of self-love. And even having this language of self-love and knowing how to even start on this journey is something that's super powerful, because it's not something that all of us are taught. In fact, many of us are not taught it. It's not a subject at school. It's not necessarily something that's passed down through our family. It's as a journey that we've had to go on ourselves, and we've all ended up in this place together as ARMY, having these conversations, which is so important. And this is what I've learned from doing this first I Am ARMY book. And I really wanted to try and give more language to what this revolution, I believe, is taking place. The Love Yourself, Speak Yourself revolution. So I believe that BTS are revolutionaries. They are showing the world exactly what it looks like to be human in the 21st century, to be someone who is an idol, to be someone who questions systems and the establishment while also being a part of it, someone who can balance these complexities, because none of us are separate from these systems. None of us are excluded from being completely dominated by all of these things that work against us. As I mentioned before, patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism, we're all a part of it. We all have different levels of control over it. We all have different experiences. Some of us are having a far better go of it than others, of course. But if BTS are revolutionaries because they are walking this self-love journey, then ARMY are too, because we're right there with them. We're doing this together, and there would be no ARMY without BTS and no BTS without ARMY. I believe it's so important that ARMY are sharing their stories now more than ever, because there are so many different experiences in the fandom that just aren't understood or aren't heard. There's no one central place to document them. People on the outside don't really know where to go when they first want to learn about ARMY. This is why I put these books together, because I wanted people to be able to find them and go, I want to understand more about ARMY. I want to know about the ARMY identity. I want to know why they love BTS. I want to know who they are as people. And I think it's so important that we understand ARMY better, because ARMY are a microcosm of the world. So the world is out here. It's a big mass of people, and ARMY is just a snapshot. And within ARMY, I feel that like we've got such a diverse range of ethnicities, cultures, countries, beliefs, etc., represented, that it is a true cross section of the world. We're just a mini world unto ourselves. And that's why it's so important to understand ARMY, firstly, so that we can understand the fandom, but secondly, so we can better understand the world, and then through that, understand ourselves. So if the world is the macrocosm and ARMY is the microcosm of the world, then I believe that BTS are the microcosm of ARMY, which is why I initially started all of my research on BTS and then expanded to ARMY. And my findings have been the same. Everything that I've learned about BTS is also true with ARMY, which I find really interesting, but of course, it's no mistake. ARMY and BTS are co-collaborators in this. They are mirror imaging one another to some degree. And when it comes to the artistry, BTS creates with ARMY, not always directly, but it's some kind of symbiotic, creative, amazing relationship. And it's wonderful and magical. So I believe that in these I Am ARMY books, what I'm able to show through helping ARMY get their personal essays, their personal stories out into the world are revolutionary stories. Stories of how these people have changed themselves and changed their lives with BTS, but of course not always because of BTS. And these are such important stories to learn so we can learn more about ourselves. In the book I write, though the root of our individual revolutionary stories may not always lie with BTS, our stories are most definitely shaped in the light of revolutionary love that exists between BTS and ARMY. Because not only is this a revolution of self-love, where ARMY has taken inspiration and listened to BTS's call to love themselves and speak themselves, but it's also a revolution that's happening between BTS and ARMY, in the relationship of fan and idol, in this creative symbiosis that not only happens when BTS create, but when ARMY create in response to BTS and for BTS. This relationship between ARMY and BTS is something unlike we've ever seen before. And of course, that is part due to the fact that ARMY is so vast and BTS have such a large influence on the world right now. But it's also because it's BTS and ARMY, and there is no other fandom and no other idol group quite like them. So I'm calling ARMY and BTS practising revolutionaries, because I believe that being a revolutionary, much like the self-love journey, is never like a fixed destination. It's never a fixed thing. You don't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to learn to love myself. And you do a few meditations, you take care of yourself, you drink some water, and hey presto, you love yourself, end of story. No, it's something that you have to commit to over and over every day, and you have to learn and grow with it. It's a never-ending journey. And through that, I can say the same about being a revolutionary. Because of course, being a revolutionary isn't just about self-love. I just believe that that's where it begins. And that's why we're looking at this love yourself, speak yourself scenario as a specific case of a revolution. Because tens, if not hundreds of millions of people now know about self-love because of BTS and are making these steps in small ways every day, every week, in whatever way they can to better themselves and better the world. But these people are not suddenly just revolutionaries and that's a full stop. They're practicing revolutionaries, meaning it's something that they practice every day. It's something that they have to strive for and want to achieve. It's not just a name badge. They don't just wage a war and become a revolutionary. This revolution is slower, it's more expansive, ever evolving than our traditional idea of what a revolution is. And that's why it's a practice. Just like you practice yoga or you practice soccer. You never just stop. Soccer players don't stop practicing. Yogis don't stop practicing yoga. You keep going. Because in order to be a soccer player, in order to be a yogi, in order to be a revolutionary, you have to practice. And the very start of that, I'm arguing, is practicing self-love, which of course within it is very vast and complex because self-love and self-hate go hand in hand. So I believe the I Am ARMY books, especially the first book, because it is written with chapters that are autoethnographical, meaning that ARMY have shared their personal story and then shown research to kind of examine and analyze what is happening to them, looking at things like masculinities and gender and feminism. They're really delving deep into these things, which makes I Am Army Book One such a valuable resource for fans and scholars and curious onlookers alike. So, through my research, I'm saying that I have found that ARMY are participating in a love yourself, speak yourself revolution. And through the stories arising in the first I Am Army book, I have been able to locate the following components that every army has experienced throughout their journey. Now, these components, although I'm going to give them to you in a linear list, they are not all experienced by army. They could just experience one or two of these things. They're not experienced in this exact order, or they could also be experienced all at one time without end. The army experience is unique and unto itself, depending on each individual, though arising from all of these stories, I have been able to locate just these few. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I'm sure there's more. So, of course, if you think of any, please let me know. So, these are the components of ARMY in the Love Yourself, Speak Yourself revolution. Before self love comes a love of BTS. Now, I'm pretty sure this is definitely a first step for the vast majority of ARMY. We fall in love with BTS first. And then through BTS, we start to develop more of this self love consciousness and this desire to better ourselves and love ourselves, because that's what BTS are doing, that's what other ARMY are doing, and that's what we want for ourselves as well. The second component I wrote is challenging and disrupting the status quo. We all get to a part in our ARMY journey, and for most of us, I think it's quite early on, where we start looking around and see all of these inequalities that arise, even from us just being ARMY. Think about telling friends and family that you like BTS and their response being, oh, but they're a bunch of girls, oh, they're Korean. We suddenly want to jump up and say, hey, that's not okay. We can write articles, we can write threads, we can make videos. We start wanting to do more to combat these very small-minded views and very incorrect views of BTS and the ARMY and the world. And then from there, this starts to ripple out to where we start challenging the status quo in more areas of our lives as well. The third component I wrote is seeking belonging and finding community. Of course, this is a huge part of being a part of a fandom. In finding BTS, we also find ARMY, and we realize that somewhere within ARMY is a place just for us. And some of us instantly find these connections within ARMY, and we can fit right into pre-made groups and circles. But others, much like myself, have to forge their own way and create little pockets of communities that are newer within the fandom. The fourth point is answering the love yourself call. And this is something that every ARMY does at some point in their journey, I believe. BTS are calling on us to learn to love ourselves. It's throughout their music, and it's throughout their practice, their daily practice as human beings, which is recorded in content far and wide. And I believe that in order to be an ARMY, we do have to step up and answer that love yourself call and learn how to love ourselves, even if it's just the tiniest bit. My fifth point is, at some point, we have to learn to embrace the complexity of self and world. Through learning how to love ourselves and becoming an ARMY, we really do start to develop a stronger sense of our identities and a stronger way of understanding our identities in relation to other ARMY and to BTS and the world. And it's a very complicated place out there. Of course, before I was mentioning colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, there are so many isms, there are so many things that seek to dominate and control us. And we often see ourselves as separate entities. There's self and the world, and we're not always harmonious. I believe that self is the world, much like how I said ARMY is the microcosm of the macrocosm, which is the world. I believe that we are ultimately all one. We're just very much at odds with one another. And the more we can do to understand ourselves as part of the world, as part of a vast ecosystem of the world, the lesser our suffering might be. And I think that ARMY do have to get to a point, and often get to a point very early on, where they have to embrace these complexities. We do live in a capitalist society, as much as many of us might not want to be. We do buy merchandise from BTS. BTS are very much active participants in capitalism. That's just one example. But that does, of course, that for me personally, of course, sits in juxtaposition to my own views, which are anti capitalist. But of course, I have to work. I have to buy groceries and clothes and other items to make sure I can participate within society. I don't have an option. I have to. BTS have to as well. So we have to embrace these complexities, of course. And the biggest complexity of all is the idol fan relationship. We are so familiar with BTS. We are so close to them through this parasocial connection. And we are friends, we are family, but they don't know us on an individual level. Yet we know them to some degree on an individual level. And this in itself is highly complex because they are making money from us and we are not making money from them. So it is not an equal give and take. But in other ways, it is. That's complex. And we have to embrace it and say, this is the reality. It doesn't necessarily make it good and it doesn't necessarily make it bad. And at some point in our army journey, we all have to get to that place. Otherwise, it is too painful. And we're at constant odds with ourselves, with other army, and with BTS, when we just have to leave space for all of these realities to coexist and to not try and resist them in the sense that we shouldn't resist that they exist. Of course, there's so many ways that we can resist in other ways, like not buying merch. That's just one example. But it doesn't mean that we're suddenly separate from everything. So that's definitely a really big one. And lastly, the sixth component is finding a safe space to speak yourself. And the best example I have of this is the army who wrote essays for these books, the I Am Army Book 1, I Am Army It's Time to Begin, and I Am Army Book 2. If you're watching on YouTube, it's over here behind my shoulder, and here's book 1. These army were able to find a safe space to really speak themselves. They put a whole chapter in a book, a whole essay that shares so much about themselves. And I feel that sharing army stories, sharing our personal stories, army or not, is incredibly healing. It's transformative and it's needed. Everybody needs to be sharing their story because, firstly, it's healing and cathartic to be able to write about ourselves and to analyze and understand what is going on in our lives. And secondly, it's so important for army to speak up, to be seen, to be heard, and to be counted, especially in very legitimate ways, such as being published in a book. And third, you never have any idea of who's actually out there reading your story and who might be impacted by it in the most profound and positive ways. If we don't share our stories as army, how will other army know that they're not alone? And that is such a vital step to the self-love journey. Loving yourself, learning what that looks like, and then, as Aram says, what's your name? Where are you from? What makes your heart race? Speak yourself. And that is such a vital step to being an army. Not only for ourselves and not only for other army, but for the entire world. So I hope this has given you some insight into the beginnings of my theorizing about the love yourself, speak yourself revolution, which is worthy of a whole book unto itself. It's definitely not a traditional revolution, and BTS and ARMY are not traditional revolutionaries. They're practicing revolutionaries dedicated to nonviolence, love, and justice. That is the BTS way, and that is the ARMY way. And if all of us were to dedicate ourselves to that, if everyone in the world were to dedicate themselves to that, the world would be a vastly different place overnight. And that's why I consider it to be a revolution, because we are changing ourselves on very small levels in day-to-day ways. We're changing our communities. And then through that, day by day, over time, this is changing the world. This is not the only revolution. And it's not to say that other revolutions are necessary. I'm saying that the love yourself, speak yourself revolution sits as part of a vast network of revolutions all underway right now. Some of them are violent. Some of them are bloody uprisings. Some of them are quiet, like this one. Some of them we don't even know about yet. But everyone is needed in the revolution, and we are all fighting for a different world. And I believe that the love yourself, speak yourself revolution is fighting for us, for self-love, for each and every one of us to find what makes us happy, what brings us joy, and what brings us love in our lives so that we can impart this onto others and out into the world. And I think that's a beautiful gift from BTS and from ARMY. So, of course, I would be remiss right now if I did not plug I Am ARMY, It's Time to Begin, and I Am ARMY, We Don't Need Permission, the two books in this series. They're both out now. You can get them at revoltbooks.com. You can also buy them in a little 2-pack for a discounted price, so you can have both on display and read them and love them forever. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and wherever you are, I hope you are having a good day. Please remember that there is an army out here in the world that wants to hear your voice and wants to hear your story. And that's me. That army is me. And I'm sending you all my love, everyone, and I am looking forward to speaking to you next week. Okay, bye.